Welcome to Topics of Today, a Williamson Inc. virtual event series. My name is Matt Largen, President and CEO of Williamson Inc. We're the Williamson County's Chamber of Commerce and Economic Development organization. Today's event is a partnership between the Bellevue-Harpeth Chamber of Commerce, Murray Alliance, and the Spring Hill Chamber. I'm going to first thank AP Live for hosting us at their space and remind people if you've got a need for studio space for now, after the pandemic, certainly check out AP Live. They provided this great studio space. They're a great corporate citizen for Williamson County, and I encourage you to check out this space and go to their website. I also encourage you, as we go through this process, to check out our website. It's williamsonchamber.com/coronavirus for all the latest resources for what's happening right now. We've got great information on financial relief for your company, for individuals. We've got great social media follows to keep up with the latest information. But again, I encourage you to go to our website, williamsonchamber.com/coronavirus. I also want to let you know that today's topic is all about SBA, and we've got the SBA experts here with us. But if you have any issues with SBA as you move through applying for the program, please email Kel McDowell. Kel is our caseworker for SBA through this process. He's at kel@williamsonchamber.com. I also suggest you go to our website too. We're adding events on a regular basis. We have our first virtual ribbon cutting this week, so make sure you go to our events calendar to check out all the virtual programming we've added over the next several months. And again, I remind you, if you have any issues you need help on, please reach out to anybody on our team. We are here to help you get through this process, so please make sure that you reach out to members of the Williamson Inc. team. I'm thrilled with today's guest. I know how busy she is, how much her team has been working around the clock and around the state. But it's my pleasure at this point to introduce LaTanya Channel. She is the State Director for Tennessee for the U.S. Small Business Administration. LaTanya, thanks so much for being our guest today. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I'll go ahead and get started if you want to go ahead and start rolling the presentation that I've sent over to you guys. But again, I just want to thank the chambers for coming together to do this jointly. I know this is a trying time for all of our small businesses, not just every citizen in the country as we cope with this virus. But of course, my mission and my agency's mission and my staff's mission is to help out the small businesses. So I just want to say a couple of things before we go through the entire PowerPoint, which is not that long. And I do have my staff as well that have joined. They are viewing the chat and also viewing some of the Q&As. I have Jacqueline Merritt of my staff and also Lindsay Gilmore. As mentioned, we've been working around the clock. Honestly, we really have, in trying to get information out to our businesses here in Tennessee. But I also want to level set some expectation. There has been a lot of media concerning the primary types of SBA assistance that is currently being provided to small businesses. And some of what you hear in the media is correct. Some of what you hear in the media is incorrect. So I have no problems in addressing any and all questions that come to us, and I will be direct and honest with you. I will also let you know, as far as setting some expectations, this is the largest lending program that our agency has ever done in the history of the Small Business Administration since it was founded in 1953. For those who are seeking PPP, which is the Payroll Protection Program loan, as you know, the CARES Act provided $349 billion. For lenders to put out those funds that will be 100% guaranteed by my agency, the Small Business Administration. Typically in 1 year, our agency only guarantees about $27 billion. So you can imagine how big of a challenge this is for us. I also want to mention as well, as far as the COVID-19 for the disaster loans, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, there is currently, I think, about $8 billion that has been allocated for that program as well, which is a really large amount considering our prior disaster loan programs whenever there is a declaration. I will also, as we go through the presentation, mention to you, and I recognize that some folks on the line might have been impacted by the March 3rd tornadoes. So we'll make sure we give you that information as well. As some of you may have heard, I don't know if a tornado touched down in Chattanooga last night, but the storms definitely touched, and there have been loss of life down there. So we're probably going to have another declaration here in Tennessee. So you can go ahead to the first slide. So the first slide is essentially, I would like to let you know, is right on our SBA website. If you go to www.sba.gov/PPP, which is Payroll Protection Program, you should come up and see this slide. You can also go directly to the link that's in that slide, which is much longer to remember, which is why we say just go to www.sba.gov/PPP. You can also, when you get to SBA.gov, you'll see a banner that talks about coronavirus relief options. Now, I'll talk briefly about the two programs that you have heard of the most, but I also want you to be aware that there are some other programs that were expanded as a result of the CARES Act that was passed several weeks ago. I can't believe it was only been 2 weeks when that was passed. So PPP, as it's commonly been referred to over the last couple of weeks, the Paycheck Protection Program. As many of you are already well aware, this is a program where SBA lenders will receive an application from a small business, which currently is identified as those businesses that are 500 employees or smaller, or have fewer employees than 500, or otherwise meet the SBA size standards. They are eligible for what's now called a Paycheck Protection Program loan. This is basically an expansion of the traditional loan program that SBA does every year, all day, every day, which is our 7A lending program, whereby SBA lenders receive your application and they process it, they do the underwriting, and they do the approvals, but yet that particular loan is guaranteed by the Small Business Administration. What's different for this PPP, as you may be well aware, is that bank now gets 100% guarantee. And there are also loads of provisions and benefits available to you as a borrower through the PPP loan program that I'll get into in a second. I also will talk to you today about the second column on this PowerPoint that you see where it says 10K Advance, EIDL Loan Advance. Just so you know, the EIDL, which we sometimes refer to as an EIDL loan, which stands for Economic Injury Disaster Loan, is a loan program. It's a normal day-to-day loan that SBA itself provides whenever there has been a declaration of a disaster. Typically, that's a declaration that's done county by county or state by state. This is the very first time in the history of our agency where there has been a declaration in every single state for COVID-19. So I will, before we're done today, mention to you what economic injury disaster loans, also called EIDL, that are still available in Tennessee other than COVID-19, specifically the tornado. What's not talked about as much, and which you don't hear much about in the press, is also what came out of the CARES Act, is an SBA Express Bridge Loan. This gave the ability for our SBA lenders to quickly provide a $25,000 loan, or up to $25,000, to any businesses that already had an existing relationship with that lender. And then finally, what also came out of the CARES Act is what we're calling SBA debt relief. If you already had an existing loan with one of our SBA lenders under SBA's programs, there's relief provided there where many of those loan payments and principal and interest are being deferred. You can go to the next slide. So under the Paycheck Protection Program, which came out of the CARES Act, again, please remember that for PPP, you have to go to a lender. Please also, I want to also let you know that prior to PPP, again, which is an expansion of our existing 7A loan program, you could only get an SBA loan from what we call our SBA lenders. These are lenders who have been approved by SBA to receive the loans, who have oversight by SBA in the execution of those loans, and who also come directly to my office here in Tennessee. And I have staff here who assist those lenders day to day on the training, on how to handle those SBA loans. With the CARES Act, what happened was not only was it just our typical normal SBA lenders around the state, for which there are about 90, any and every, hear me, any and every financial institution could offer these paycheck protection loans to a borrower who not came into the bank, because no one's coming into banks these days, but who reached out to that lender for this particular loan. So if you have heard in the news that there have been some challenges on the back end with lenders accessing SBA systems, that was correct, because we all of a sudden had a huge onslaught of lenders who wanted to be able to do this type of SBA loan. You may have also heard that there were some challenges with those lenders that already had access to dispersing those loans. And I'll talk a little bit about that at the end. But here's the basic provisions you see on the screen about the PPP. The main purpose of PPP, which is an expansion again of the 7A loan program, was for job retention. For those employees either you already had to let go, or for those employees you're currently letting go, the purpose is to provide a loan that covers 8 weeks of payroll. And the primary benefit to small business owners is the vast majority of this loan, if not all of it, would be forgivable. So when you hear in the news that these are loans, these are grants, essentially, and you'll sometimes hear people say, well, there's a loan that turns into a grant. I'm not going to use that language, but the bottom line is portions of the loan, if not all of it, will be forgiven if you follow the rules and how you use those funds. The loans are available for up to $10 million, which is an expansion of our existing SBA loan programs. As I'm sure many of you are aware, banks started accepting those loan applications. It'll be 2 weeks from this coming Friday. And for sole proprietors and independent contractors, the window opened up on April 10th, although we hear that some lenders were accepting before the 10th. You can go to the next slide, please. The interest rate on these payroll protection loans, 1% interest. And again, portions, if not all of it, can be forgiven. The first payment for every single one of these loans that are dispersed by these lenders, the first payments are deferred for 6 months. Please know that does not mean that the interest is not accruing. The interest is accruing from when the loan gets dispersed, but those first 6 months of payments after the disbursement, those loan payments are deferred. No collateral is required. Now we are getting reports from some borrowers when they talk to individual lenders. They're giving different information on what's required and what's not required. But the law said there was no collateral required, no personal guarantees, and there should be no fee to you. There is no fee to you, and all the fees are payable by SBA. So if you run across someone who's charging a fee for these loans, run quickly because they're probably not one of our approved lenders. You can go to the next slide. Now, in addition, as I mentioned at the top when I first started speaking, in addition to the PPP loans, SBA has a program called the Economic Injury Disaster Loans. These are loans that are typically offered whenever there is a physical disaster. This is the very first time where there has been an economic injury disaster loan as for something non-physical, COVID-19. And the very first time, we're at the very same time, all 50 states are offering this economic injury disaster loan. The primary difference that you need to know is that these economic injury disaster loans are SBA loans, government loans, direct loans to you. The loan receipt is by SBA. The decision-making is by SBA. The loan officer is an SBA employee. The underwriting is done by an SBA employee, which is very different than PPP, which is done by a lender. For all of our EIDL, economic injury disaster loans, whether it's COVID-19 or for another disaster, businesses are eligible to get up to $2 million at a current interest rate of 3.75%. And nonprofits are also eligible for economic injury disaster loans. I neglected to mention that with PPP loans, Congress did extend 501c3s are eligible for the payroll protection loans, where you go to a bank. For the economic injury disaster loans, as noted on the screen, nonprofits that fall into a 501c, 501d, or 501e have always been eligible for these types of loans, what we call economic injury disaster loans from SBA. The purpose is to pay those expenses that you cannot normally pay, but for the disaster happening. The difference is the payroll protection loan is for the payroll and overhead utilities to keep the business going and to keep the business functioning. For the COVID-19 economic injury disaster loans, our administrator decided very early on that the payment deferrals will automatically be for an entire year. 1 year automatic loan deferment for those payments. Once again, there is no fee, there's no points, and there are no closing costs. At the very beginning, collateral was required for loans above $25,000. The agency has just changed that, where now collateral is only needed for loans above $500,000 for these economic injury disaster loans. And that has been relaxed just in the last week or so. Next slide. Coupled with the economic injury disaster loan for COVID-19 out of the CARES Act is a loan advance. So if you go on to SBA's website, sba.gov/disaster, and you apply for an economic injury disaster loan for COVID-19, only for the COVID-19 economic injury disaster loan, you will check a box within that application where it asks you, would you like to be considered for an advance? I need you to be very mindful of these two words, up to $10,000 advance. Now, prior to last week, it was our understanding that the advance there was going to be a determination as to how that was going to be made. Last week, we got word that, and it was also verified, that our agency is providing those advances $1,000 per employee, with the maximum of $10,000 for the advance. One thing you need to be mindful of, whether the economic injury disaster loan is declined, whether it's approved, or whether you get the loan approved, the economic injury disaster loan, and you then say, I don't want it. The advance amounts are completely forgivable by SBA. I do want to mention that you have probably heard in the news that there have been some delays in getting these loan funds out. Absolutely, they have been. As I mentioned to you before, typically SBA ramps up these types of loans in cases of disaster, physical disaster. So the tornado that hit Tennessee on March 3rd, there's an economic injury disaster loan for that. There's some flooding that currently went on in Mississippi. Back in February in Mississippi. So there's an economic injury disaster loan for that. Many of you may remember the Gatlinburg fires that happened in East Tennessee. There was an economic injury disaster loan for that. If you go to our website, www.sba.gov/disaster, it will show all the current declarations nationwide, all the declarations in Tennessee. But I need you to note that the difference is there is no advance for all those other disasters. This advance only applies to the COVID-19 economic injury disaster loan. I will also note that there are businesses, of course, that were affected by the tornado, as well as affected by COVID-19. And those businesses are eligible for each of those loans. They can apply for more than one. Next slide, please. This is another program that was expanded under the CARES Act that we have not heard much about. A lot of folks, we have not got much inquiry in our office about, and you probably have not heard much about it from your lender because they're so busy and they're swamped with PPP. But this is an option. If you already had an existing relationship with one of our SBA lenders, you could access up to $25,000 for a quick, fast turnaround loan from them. And then the proceeds from that can be paid for from the economic injury disaster loan if you apply for SBA for that. honestly, we haven't even heard from anyone that has applied for this because most people are seeking the economic injury disaster loans or the PPP, but it is available and more information is on the website. Next slide, please. And this was a huge provision that came out of the CARES Act. Since we have multiple chambers on the call today, I am absolutely sure there has to be some businesses that already had existing SBA loans. So if you already had, prior to the COVID-19 pandemic that we're going through and prior to the CARES Act, if you already had an existing SBA 7A loan, which is our typical SBA loans that we've always offered, or our 504 loans, or an SBA microloan, as a result of the CARES Act, SBA is automatically paying the principal, interest, and fees of any current 7A 504 SBA microloans for 6 months, automatically paying the principal, interest, and fees on any new 7A 504 microloans issued before September 27th, 2020. And for any existing or current disaster loans, remember I mentioned the tornado, remember I mentioned Gatlinburg, remember I mentioned flooding in Mississippi. Those are all disaster loans under our SBA disaster loan program. If the loan was in regular servicing as of March 1, 2020, still an active loan still being paid on, those loans are automatically deferred through December 31st, 2020. So this came out of the CARES Act as well, and a lot of folks are not recognizing that, but that is some relief that's also available as being provided by SBA. Next slide, please. I just want to quickly mention, we've been getting lots of questions as to whether or not a business impacted by the tornado can apply for multiple loans. And the answer is yes, 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 and yes. So on the left-hand side of the slide, the Tennessee tornadoes that occurred on March the 3rd. There are two different types of loan programs that came out of that, and both of them are SBA direct loans. You come directly to SBA, sba.gov/disaster, and apply for either or both a physical disaster loan or an economic injury disaster loan as a result of the tornado. A physical disaster loan is just that. If there was repairs or replacement of any property owned by the business, that could be real estate, that could be inventory, that could be supplies, that could be machinery, that could be equipment. Any business of any size, not just a small business, is still eligible for those physical disaster loans from SBA if that physical damage came from the tornado. And the deadline for that is May 4th, 2020. Also from the tornado is an economic injury disaster loan, same name as the COVID-19 loan, but a different loan. And this is only available to small businesses and nonprofits, as I explained earlier, 501Cs, 501Ds, 501Es. But again, if economic injury was suffered from the tornado, that is a second loan option available. And here's what I think is super critical for those on the line to understand. For the Tennessee tornadoes, for the physical disaster loans, those are available to any business affected in Davidson County, Putnam, and Wilson. However, for the tornadoes, for economic injury disaster loans from the tornadoes, any business in any of these counties is eligible for this type of economic injury disaster loan. Cannon County, Cheatham, Cumberland, DeKalb, Fentress, Jackson, Overton, Robertson, Rutherford, Smith, Sumner, Trousdale, White, and Williamson County. So if your business is located in any of those counties and suffer economic injury from the tornado, you can also apply for this loan from the SBA as an economic injury for small business and nonprofit. That's the second type of a loan still available. Deadline for that again is, for the economic injury from the tornado, the deadline is December 7th, 2020. Physical damage loan deadline, May 4th. Now, as a result of COVID-19, on the right-hand column of the slide, this is the loan I've been talking about from the very beginning. This is the loan where millions of businesses around the country are applying for. This is the one that has been deemed a nationwide disaster. So that is a third loan available to Tennessee businesses, a third type of loan, economic injuries disaster loan, again from SBA. The fourth would, of course, be the PPP. We've been getting countless questions from businesses who were affected by the tornado who believe they can only apply for one or the other. No, you can apply for all three of these if you're in the affected county, plus a PPP loan. Next slide, please. So physical damage loans from the tornadoes or any other physical declaration that SBA has issued. Homeowners and renters are also eligible for physical damage loans from the Small Business Administration. That's up to $40,000 to replace or repair damaged property, which includes vehicles. For the homeowners, up to $200,000 to replace the actual primary residence. And then again, business, nonprofits, and faith-based organizations, up to $2 million for property damage. I neglected to mention for the PPP, there is guidance on our SBA website where now faith-based organizations are eligible for that as well. And you can see on the screen what the interest rates are for those physical damage. Next slide. Once again, I don't want to keep confusing you, but there is a separate economic injury disaster loan just from the tornado. Williamson County is included, and you can see the terms on the screen, and that's also on our website. Next slide, please. And this last slide basically has more information to reach out to my office. Again, 2 of my staff are on the line. They're probably monitoring the chats and the questions as I was running my mouth. Also at the very top is the phone number directly to the SBA Disaster Customer Service Center. That is the office that processes those economic injury disaster loans. At one point, they were open 24/7. Now they're open 8A to 8P Eastern Standard Time. That number is 1-800-659-2955. Yes, it is difficult to get through on the line. I will not lie to you on that, which is part of the reason why my staff and I have been working so hard to take your calls and questions. We're available via phone, 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Central, 615-736-5881. And every single one of my staff members has the same list of FAQs and can answer your question. You don't have to go to any one particular person. I just indicated Jacqueline Merritt and Lindsay Gilmore, who are my staff on the line right now, and they're also listed on the slide because their primary duties are dealing directly with small businesses. But if you call my office, 615-736-5881, and press 0, any staff member can assist you with all the different options that are available, whether it's PPP, whether it's the economic injury disaster loan, or anything else that SBA is providing. And again, I just want everyone to know that SBA headquarters is working diligently to make sure your lenders are not being held up from dispersing those loan funds to you, because there were some challenges on the back end with SBA and getting those funds to you. I'm going to be honest with you, as of this moment, I have not heard from a business that has received an economic injury disaster loan from SBA, but I know they've got to be out there, simply because our phones have not rung as much over the last, I'd say 4 or 5 days. So there are some challenges, and I'm available to take some questions.
Great. Thank you so much, LaTanya. That was a fantastic presentation. I greatly appreciate it. Clearly, Tennessee and our small business community is in good hands with you and your team. So I just want to thank you from the partner organizations that are here today for all the hard work you've been doing on behalf of our small business community.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So we are taking live Q&A. This tests every bit of my technical expertise, but we'll get to as many questions as we possibly can together, LaTanya. We did a survey over the last couple weeks, and our membership is certainly looking for relief. They're looking to retain their employees. So the first question to you, and actually we got some emails just this morning about companies and nonprofits that had received their PPP amounts. What's the timeline look like for both the receiving the PPP funds and for the economic disaster funds?
So as of last Wednesday, for PPP funds from your individual lender, those funds should start shooting out very quickly. It was last Wednesday when SBA headquarters notified the individual bankers and banks that once they had the loan authorization from SBA headquarters, that they must, MUST, disperse those funds within 5 days. Here's the thing, things are changing quickly. On Thursday, SBA changed that because some of the lenders were overwhelmed and went, wait a second, we won't be able to do this in 5 days because we have thousands of people waiting. So SBA's guidance on Thursday of last week was that the lenders must disperse the loan funds within 10 days of getting that loan authorization from SBA headquarters. So then on Friday, things quickly changed again, because the lenders said, wait a second, it's taking you too long, SBA, to get back to my banker. The borrowers said that, and of course the lenders said that to SBA headquarters. So late Friday afternoon, SBA issued some new guidance that essentially said to the lenders, hey, you do not have to wait for the SBA formal loan authorization. You do not have to wait for the SBA note directly from SBA. The lenders can start dispersing. So what you as borrowers should expect to be hearing pretty soon is back from your banker saying, hey, here's a note. It could be a note that the bank itself crafted versus the SBA one, which is perfectly fine. And once that bank gets the go-ahead from SBA, they have to disperse those funds within 10 days. Now, on the economic injury disaster loan, the management team of SBA is having a meeting this afternoon, and I hope to have some more answers for you after 3 o'clock, because honestly, things have been happening so quickly. And the onslaught of applications, of course, to lenders and also to SBA, we're talking millions of small businesses, that many times some of the guidance is hitting our website before it hits us here in Tennessee. So at our website, www.sba.gov/PPP, and also the Treasury website, believe it or not, www.treasury.gov. If you look for FAQs for borrowers and lenders, sometimes there's updates there faster than I can provide. And I honestly cannot tell you a timeline on the EIDL loans, and I wish that I could, because every time we thought they were ready to roll out, something happened with our SBA back system. So I honestly don't have any specifics on that yet for you, and I wish I did.
Okay. Thanks, LaTanya. I appreciate that. Again, for people watching, make sure you put your questions in the Q&A portion of this. We'll get to as many as we can. Also, we got some questions emailed before the event, so I'm toggling between those and the ones that are asked live. So the next question, LaTanya, you probably don't have an answer, but maybe it can provide a perspective. Are we reaching the point where these funds are being exhausted nationwide? And then what could happen after that?
So here's the latest that I have. And once again, many times I'm relying on what you guys are relying on, media reports, because our SBA headquarters is swamped. Here's what you need to know. For PPP, $349 billion was approved just for that pot of money for PPP. I do not believe, but I honestly do not have an official answer, that we have reached that limit yet. But here's what I also know. And you all have probably heard this in the news as well, that both Democrats and Republicans and the president and the SBA administrator and the head of Treasury are looking to add an additional $200 billion to that 349. As far as the EIDL funding, there was $8 billion that was allocated just for COVID-19 economic injury disaster loans. And again, those disbursements have not hit yet. As far as I know, I honestly don't know if we reached that limit, but I can honestly tell you, if it looks like we're getting close, just like for PPP, I'm sure there's going to be lots of discussions between my leadership in Washington, Congress, and the president to add more funds to both programs.
Okay, great.
Now, let me add this one caveat. We've gotten questions from borrowers who have gone to their individual banker who said, hey, we've reached our max. We can't loan any more money through PPP. Here's 2 reasons why that could be. There could be a maximum amount that lender can loan out based on some other federal rules some other federal regulations. There could have been sanctions placed on that lender or something having nothing to do with this that limited the amount that they could loan out. I know, for instance, there's one lender, I won't name it, but they were under sanctions and they could only go to a certain dollar amount, and those sanctions were lifted last week. So if the lender's telling you that they can't go lend anymore because they've reached their cap, go to another lender. It's not because the big pot of money that Congress has approved is gone. It has to do with that individual.
Great, thanks, LaTanya, for that. So we talked kind of globally. Now I want to get more specific with one of the questions. What is the best thing to do with retained contractors? We have 3 contractors that are retained and were in the process of moving to full-time, but we stopped in February due to the threat of all this. What's the best way to handle them?
Well, so if you go to, I'm going to send you to the easier website to navigate, even though the information is on both. If you go to www.treasury.gov, and again, you can go to sba.gov/PPP. Here's what I need you to look for. We wrote it in government ease as opposed to plain language. I need you to look for the document that says interim final rule. Interim final rule, whether it's on treasury.gov or sba.gov/PPP. Those are the current existing rules and guidance for the lenders and for you, the small business borrowers, and for us here in the district office. And it does specifically address independent contractors and how they can be treated under PPP. The one piece of guidance that was in there and has already remained is that if they were already independent contractors with your business, then those independent contractors were also eligible for PPP themselves, so they could not be used towards your payroll. So sadly, it sounds like you were stuck between a rock and a hard place if they were not yet converted to employees, independent contractors in that situation. I will also add a caveat, though, please, for owners of businesses, that we did get some guidance, and I hope I'm correct on this because I'm not sure if it's been posted on the website, but if you are an owner, please make sure you are counting yourself towards that loan amount, whether you take owner's draws, whether you give yourself a W-2, or whether you however you otherwise pay yourself as an owner. So that's the best right now I have on that, Matt.
Okay, thanks, LaTanya. I appreciate it. I think I know the answer to this, but obviously you're the expert in the room here, or on the video chat. Are all nonprofits eligible even if they are a 501c6?
So it depends on which program you're talking about. So for the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, which comes out which is currently in effect for COVID-19, the nonprofits that are eligible are if you're a 501c, doesn't matter what number comes after it. A 501d, doesn't matter what comes after it, what number comes after it. Or a 501e, doesn't matter what number comes after it, you are eligible for an economic injury disaster loan. For PPP, the regulations expressly say 501c3 only and some faith-based and religious organizations. So I think the question you had was a 501c6.
Yeah.
That would be economic injury disaster loan because that falls under 501c.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. So if someone's submitted an application for the EIDL loan, how do they check on the status of that application specifically?
Great question, and it has been the number one question my office has fielded over the last 2 weeks. It has kept us busy because honestly, the answer has changed daily. So this is the most recent guidance that we have received from our disaster office. And please know this, in times of I don't even know if this is a proper way to say it, a normal disaster. So a normal disaster would be the tornado or the Gatlinburg fires, right? So whenever those disasters are declared, there's an entire department called the SBA Office of Disaster Assistance. They immediately ramp up and hire employees who are temporary employees, but they're already trained in SBA's disaster loan programs. And they ramp up and they man the customer service center. They accept the applications. And they also come on the ground. There was a time period where I had 20 people sent to me here in Tennessee that were on the ground trying to reach out to businesses and chambers and elected officials for the tornado. That's a normal disaster. For COVID-19, the agency had to quickly ramp up. I will let you know that in the last couple of weeks, for the customer service center and for the application process, the agency has already hired 5,000 temporary employees. The challenge is, because it's a national disaster, many of those are not yet trained. And the very biggest challenge our agency had was, how do you train up thousands of employees without getting them in the same room in light of COVID-19? So there have been some struggles, and here's what those struggles look like. When you call the 1-800 number for our customer service center, normally you should be able to call that 1-800 number, 1-800-659-2955. Normally, you should be able to call and a customer service rep can give you your application status. Normally, you should be able to call and it shouldn't take hours long to get through to a customer service rep. Sorry to say, all these things have not been happening. It's been taking a while to get through on the line. And when you call, people are getting different answers. But this is the latest information that we have been given here in Tennessee, and I hope it is still correct as of 1:40 p.m. Central Time. If you applied for an economic injury disaster loan with SBA and your application started with a 2, the number 2, which means you most likely applied before March the 30th because the system crashed a little before that, you should be able to call that number and they should be easily able to tell you your status. Now, trust me, we have received some complaints that that's not happening. Keep trying to call. If you submitted your application and your application begins with a 3-3, that most likely means you submitted after March the 30th and you used the expedited application process where all you did was answer a bunch of questions and you didn't have to submit documentation. Just wait, because if you call that 1-800 number, you're going to get frustrated because they won't be able to provide you with immediate status. Having said that, that was the most recent guidance that we had as of last Thursday or Friday. And we haven't got anything new. So you should be able to call that number. You may have to hang on a little while to get status. It's 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard, 1-800-659-2955. And the email is disastercustomerservice@sba.gov. Again, Matt, it's an onslaught of applications from all over the U.S., so it's taken a little bit of time to get through that line.
I understand that completely, LaTanya. Here's another specific question. Do employees who have filed for unemployment and been approved for unemployment qualify for this company to bring back on board with PPP?
Let me make sure I answer that correctly. So
Sure.
if the employee has already filed for unemployment and has been approved for unemployment,
Right.
yes, you can count them towards your payroll for PPP. If you look at the regulations, which is the current guidance for your lender, for you and for us, which is on that website I mentioned, and I'll repeat it again, it tells you exactly how to compute your payroll. And there's 2 ways noted. One is for the entire year, last year, 2019, or another way is a certain time period. And I can't remember what it is off the top of my head right now, but it's real explicit in those regulations for when those employees were on board. If they're currently on unemployment, that's fine. The regulation specifically speaks to hiring back your employees by June the 30th.
Okay.
So that's fine if they're on unemployment and have already been approved for it.
Okay.
You have until June 30th to bring your employees back.
Okay, great. Thanks, LaTanya. Another very specific one. On the PPP, do we have to have 75% of our staff back in force from the time we actually receive the funding in order for it to be forgivable?
That is a question that has come up this morning, and I honestly do not even have the answer to that because I just sent it up. And I will assure you that the other question that was related to that came to us this morning is, what if we receive the loan disbursement and we're not yet ready to bring back all of our employees because either, our county is still under orders where we can't open, of course the state still is, or our business just hasn't picked up yet, so I can't hire back all my employees at once. What do? I've sent those questions up this morning so we can get further guidance.
Great. Thank you, LaTanya. You mentioned earlier about portions being forgiven if you follow the rules. So here's this question around that. Are there checks and balances to make sure that the business who receives the PPP funds are using it to pay their employees? And how do employees know if the business has applied and received the funds?
How do employees know that the business has applied and received the funds? Was that the second part?
Well, it's really, that's probably less important than the checks and balances. What are the checks and balances in place to make sure that the loan is actually going to pay for the employees?
So the primary check and balance is at some point, and I don't know the date yet, and at some time that business is going to have to show what they use those loan funds for. And that's the only way that the PPP loans can be forgivable, if they pay out, if they use the loan disbursement according to the rules. I don't yet know what that date is when the business has to prove that, nor to whom they're going to have to submit that documentation. But that's the primary way of knowing that the business used those PPP funds properly. I will offer that every single federal agency, including SBA, has an Office of Inspector General. And if you go on our website, sba.gov, and search for Inspector General or whistleblower, if there's a concern about the use of the loan proceeds, trust me, just report that to our whistleblower's office. Same concern on the other end. If you as small businesses have applied for an SBA loan and come to find out it really wasn't an SBA loan, or it was some kind of fraud that was committed and it wasn't a bank lender, please report that also to our office and to the whistleblower's office, because there's some things going on that shouldn't be happening. But there are methods of reporting to make sure government funds are being used properly.
Thank you. Again, I'm not sure if you'll know the answer to this question, but you could provide some perspective. And
I can't hear you, Matt.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if you know exactly the answer to this, but could provide some perspective on this. And we've heard around from different banks that we've called, but have you seen banks prioritizing sole proprietorships, working up to your 300 to 400 person business? Or are we just, is every bank different when it comes to the rules and regulations they're putting in place to access the PPP?
Every single bank is different.
Yep.
Honestly, I've heard from some lenders that are just taking them first come, first serve. I've heard that some lenders weren't accepting sole props or independent contractors until the 10th. I've heard some lenders have just been taking all applicants that come, that apply. So every bank is different.
So here's a question that was actually emailed ahead of time. Is there anything that the SBA can recommend for companies who don't qualify for SBA programs? Any places they could go other than SBA if they don't meet the criteria?
Absolutely. This is a good time for me to let you all know that throughout the state of Tennessee, we have 15 different centers that are funded by my agency to provide one-on-one hands-on assistance, the small business development centers, and there's 16 centers around the state. Of course, in the current COVID-19 situation with the virus, we're not meeting one-on-one. So if you go to their website, which is www.T as in Tom, S as in Sam, B as in boy, D as in dog, C as in cat.org, which stands for Tennessee Small Business Development Center, you can get virtual assistance. I've neglected to mention this, and I should have mentioned this at the very top. They're also helping applicants with the PPP loan process and also with the economic injury disaster loan process. Now, please level set expectations. They don't know any more than we do, because the guidance that we provide to them is the guidance that we get from headquarters. But they are actively assisting clients today. If you go on their website, you just enter your information and someone's going to call you back from any one of the 15 centers around the state, because they're all virtual right now. So our small business development centers are still available. Our SCORE counselors, score.org, are still available around the state. We have a women's business center that covers the entire state, which is Pathway Women's Business Center, that provides assistance to small businesses, as well as a Veterans Business Outreach Center that's also connected with Pathway as well.
Great. Thank you, LaTanya. That's a really great list for people who maybe don't qualify for these. This is a more specific question about PPP again. Does the PPP's eight-week period begin as soon as I receive funds, or can I start any time within that window?
We got that question this morning, and I have sent it up to headquarters. And this is a question that has come up because we have businesses that say, hey, I don't need the money right now, but I might need it in 4 weeks, or I might need it come July 1st, or I might need it come June 15th. So if it's not directly addressed in that interim rule, which again is all the guidance that we have, I'm sending those questions up to headquarters and hope we can get some answers for that.
Great, thank you. 10 minutes, okay. Great, here's another specific question, LaTanya. My earnings come from two specific sources of which my LLC is a subcontractor for. I receive a 1099 statement from them. What else do I need in place to be considered for a loan? My taxes for 2019 are not complete yet.
So I'm assuming this is, they themselves are the independent contractor? Is that what I'm to understand?
I would think so, yes.
Okay, so here's the thing. Just as all banks are accepting applications differently, some first come, first serve, some prioritizing different applications, you're going to have to talk to your individual bank lender. Here's what you need to know. The rules that are out that I mentioned that are on the treasury.gov site and the SBA.gov site, and I think my staff member Lindsay posted in the chat the direct link to it. Again, if you go to it, it's going to say interim final rule. We had to write it in governmentese as opposed to just saying rules on PPP. But interim final rule, you're going to see that what it specifically says is, for the most part, businesses just simply need to certify, hey, this is what I use for payroll, including me as the owner, and this is what I intend the loan to be used for. However, when you talk to your lender, they have to look out for themselves as well to make sure that they get that guarantee. So they're going to ask for a whole host of documentation from you. Some lenders will ask for more, some will ask for less. So I think that's a question you definitely need to talk to your lender about as to what documentation that you would need as an independent contractor. It could be canceled checks, it could be 1099s, it could be a whole host of things to show what that income looked like for you.
Okay, and that's a good sort of general question. Are there things that companies could do to make this process easier on the front end, like have all these documents in front of them, either with the disaster loan or for the PPP? What are the 3 or 4 documents you would recommend?
If tax returns,
okay.
I would say your last 2 years of completed tax returns, because I recognize a lot of people have not filed their 2019 returns. Your payroll statements, the 941s and 940s for those where you have staff, W-2s for yourself as the owner if you pay yourself, or otherwise documentation to show what you as the owner pay yourself to make sure you're included in the calculation for the PPP. That would be the 3 top things that I would recommend. And for the EIDL loan, the agency streamlined that whole entire process on March the 30th. So at this point, you don't even need any documents until you get a phone call from an SBA or an email from an SBA staffer. And last we heard, that's the last we heard, again, the guidance may have changed, is that up to $500,000 in EIDL loans, you don't even need any collateral. So that documentation process has been streamlined. But I think having those 3 tax returns, the last 2 years that you have, whatever to show how you pay yourself as an owner, whether it's W-2s, whether it's statements from the bank account showing you transfer funds from the business account to yourself, whether it's draws, whether it's a financial statement showing what you paid yourself, have that available, and those 940s that you would typically have with your tax returns for your business, for your payroll.
Great. Thanks, LaTanya. That's some great advice for companies out there. Next, it's a very specific question around the PPP. If my company only brings back 50% of the workforce, what percentage of loan forgiveness would we receive under the PPP?
I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not even going to try to answer that question without me looking at the regulations.
Okay.
And that's specifically in the regulation that I mentioned called interim final rule on our website and on the Treasury website. Right. I don't want to steer anybody the wrong way on that one.
I appreciate that greatly. I liked what you talked about earlier about being transparent. That's really important in this process. Is there a formula for PPP to use to pay employees while the business is closed?
Is there a formula to use to pay? Okay, so let me answer it this way, which is what I think the question is. There is a formula to use to determine what the loan amount should be for PPP, which of course will be the forgivable portion. So if you go directly to that interim final rule, which is the current guidance out there, there's literally a page and a half of examples of calculations to show you how to determine, how to calculate the loan amount. It's going to explain to you that for each individual employee, you can't go over $100,000 in cash for each individual. It's also going to explain to you what's considered overhead. It's also going to talk about that you can include vacation time, sick leave, all those other items that you would normally have to pay out in payroll. And then after you add up all those allowable costs, you multiply that by 2.5. And there's multiple examples right in the heart of that guidance. And again, that's your guidance to arm yourself as a small business owner. That's the lender's guidance. And that's the current guidance that we have here in the district office in Tennessee. Right on the website, treasury.gov, PPP, and SBA.gov, PPP, the interim final rule. And I think Lindsay of my staff posted a link to it. And the real good examples in plain English. It's probably one of the few regulations that's written in plain English that we put out in the government.
Thank you for that. We've got time for just a couple more questions. Can PPP dollars be used to reimburse dollars transferred from savings or otherwise borrowed in order to keep employees in the payroll awaiting the PPP dollars?
The regulations specifically address that you can roll in your economic injury disaster loan. Let's say you had already applied for an economic injury disaster loan and you use that for payroll. Okay. You can roll those funds into the PPP so that you can get those forgiven. About other funds, I do not believe that's addressed. And I would highly encourage you to read those rules carefully for that, because remember, the idea of the program is you don't have the cash, and that's why I need the loan. So if you already have cash available, then I'm not exactly sure that that was the intent of the loan program. But again, I will say if you had to borrow funds, for instance, from the economic injury disaster loan, or you got a bridge loan from your lender to help your payroll, you can roll those in, according to the regulations, into the PPP and get that forgiven.
Great. Well, LaTanya, thank you and your team for making the time to be here with us today. We answered 35 questions. There's still around 30 open. I think that's a pretty good rate, all things considered. But again, I know you've been doing this across the state, across the region, and I just appreciate you making the time for us and all the hard work you and your team are doing on behalf of small business and organizations across Tennessee. Thank you, LaTanya. I really appreciate it.
Thank you all, and definitely thank you all for doing this together. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, great point. Again, thank you to the Bellevue-Harpeth Chamber of Commerce, to Murray Alliance, to Spring Hill Chamber. We were happy to host this as Williamson Inc. Thank you to AP Live for providing the studio space. We will see you next time, next Monday at 1 for the next topics of today. Thank you for your continued investment in our community through your investment in Williamson Inc. And stay tuned for this commercial from AP Live on exactly how they can help your business in these times of need. Thanks again.
There will always be a need for in-person meetings and gatherings, but sometimes that's not possible.
We still need to work together as teams. We just need to do it in a new way, and we can help facilitate those conversations just all online.
We're able to offer some virtual solutions that are going to allow for that business to still take place and for those important conversations to still happen. Whether it's online polling, whether it's a digital touchscreen, whether it's a fireside chat or a panel, whatever is best going to communicate your message virtually, we can make that happen.
AP Live has been doing virtual meetings for a very long time now. We've been doing them all over the world, and that expertise and that experience is what will allow us to help you communicate your message and be collaborative as we move forward in the digital world.